Good evening. Welcome to this joint meeting of the Warrant Committee and the School Committee. I'm the Warrant Committee Chair, Jay Funling. It is the 3rd of November. Karen, can you call roll of the Warrant Committee?
We have Jay Fundling, Nicole Boyce-Norstellis, Elaine Craighead, Lorraine D., Grace Doherty, Larry Johnson, Andrew Coe, Brian McGuire, and Nicholas Tangney. You have a quorum?
Okay. I do want to say before we get into the business of the meeting, which is mostly talking to our friends on the school committee administration, our next meeting is two weeks from today, and we're going to start with I'm calling them budget overviews. Where do things stand on these budget items? Boy, I might need to steal one of your seltzers. And I asked for the first ones to be from library, health, consolidated facilities, and IT. I specifically chose people who were either experienced warrant committee members or experienced with the topic they're covering, such as Larry. I realized I gave you a little direction, but kept it a little vague as to what I wanted. So in the next 2 weeks, maybe even in the next couple of days, I'm happy to connect with any of y'all and sort of talk more about what you should be presenting 2 weeks from now. But if you have an idea, run with it, even better.
I think I have a pretty good idea for the IT committee. The other ones I might need some help on, the fire department and the other one that I have.
Yeah.
The IT committee, I've gone over his budget a ton of times, so.
Are we all presenting?
Talk to Andrew too.
Not all next week, 4 people next week. Oh, and then not even all period. There are like 10 different budgets that I want presentations on, and you may not be on
We'll connect all of them.
We're not gonna present on every budget.
Definitely not every budget. No,
It's too bad, I was looking forward to that.
5-hour meeting.
Here's the budget.
Less questions.
You're gonna be on Zoom for that one.
All right, so the main point of this evening's meeting is to talk to our friends at the school committee and school administration and hear the plan for the budget and get us kicked off right for the year. I would invite everyone to come join us. I count 5 of you here. We have 5 seats in a row. You could intermingle with us if you're feeling social. Either way. Welcome Chair Serio, who served with me on the warrant committee 2 years before leaving.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for having us. You guys get set up. I'm Amanda Serio. I'm the chair of the school committee, and I'm here with Mark Loring, who is the chair of the finance subcommittee, Nathan Hutto, who is a member of the finance subcommittee, interim superintendent John Phelan, and assistant superintendent of finance Katie Blake. Thanks for inviting us. I think it's a great opportunity for us to introduce the team, introduce the budget process. I know for many of you, this might be new. For others, you probably might do budgets within your job, but I think a school budget can be very different. So what we wanted to do is just take you over the budget process, talk a bit about maybe the strategy and the philosophy behind the budget, talk a little bit about the roles and responsibilities between the school committee and the administration, and then talk high level about the timeline. And then I think there are some other things a little bit more in depth with respect to the budget that Katie and John will go through. So with that, we'll turn it over.
Sure. Thank you, Amanda. Just want to introduce myself. I'm John Phelan. I am the interim superintendent for the school year for Milton Public Schools. Fortunate former Milton Public School employee for 16 years, so very familiar with the town. Also a town resident here in Milton and previous superintendent in Belmont. So I'm very, very familiar with the town and the school system in the work that's being done. So very, very happy to be here. Would like to introduce Katie Blake, assistant superintendent for finance, who is in her 2nd year. And I think for Katie, 1 year is like a dog year. It is kind of, it was a very, very big learning curve coming into Milton last year. And I just want to say before we start that I'm very, very grateful that she is my partner and our partner in this work. Her ability to understand the budget, communicate it, and work with the staff that we have in the school committee has been tremendous since I've arrived in May. And I'm very thankful that she's here. So thank you, Katie.
Thank you. And I think I'm going to be the one that is sharing the presentation tonight. So can you enable sharing? Is there?
You should be able to share as a
Okay.
participant. Do you have share screen?
It says host disabled.
Oh, the back room might be the host too.
We wait, would it make sense to go through the agenda? Just while we wait, does it make sense to go through the agenda, just so?
I think it's fine.
Sure.
You should be good.
Try it now.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Okay. So just to kick it off tonight, I just wanted to overview some of the topics that we'll be talking about. We have a number of topics on the agenda, just starting with the budget timeline, so you have a sense of some of the key dates in the school budget creation process. We'll also talk about budgeting best practices in the budget philosophy, which also introduces and talks about the teaching and learning priorities for the school district for the current year. We'll also overview some of the budget roles and responsibilities, so who's responsible for what within the school department. There's information on the components of the school department budget, and that's more from an expense standpoint. And then also information on education funding accounts, so that's more from the revenue side. We will overview the budget frequently asked questions, talk about some next steps, and then hopefully have some time for questions and discussion at the end. So starting with the budget timeline, and I apologize because this is pretty small on the screen. But I did want to add much of the information that we'll show you tonight during the presentation can be found on the FY26 budget page on the Milton Public Schools website. So one of those documents is the budget timeline, and this is just a snapshot of the timeline. You can see that we indicated where we are tonight, which is the initial meeting between the school committee and the warrant committee with that high level overview of the school department budget. And there are a number of meetings that are already outlined that bring us up to the public presentation of the school department draft budget, and that will happen late January, early February. So as I said, this budget timeline was reviewed by the finance subcommittee, and it was also reviewed by the full school committee. And if you want to actually see a version of it that hopefully you can read a little bit better, that can be found on the district's website. So an important part of our work during the year is ensuring that we're following budgeting best practice while both administering the budget and also while we're creating the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. So for FY27, the Government Finance Officers Association Alliance for Excellence in School Budgeting recommends that all districts follow the below steps. And so the steps in budgeting best practice are, first of all, being able to plan and prepare. So we want to make sure that we are reaching out to our partnerships, that we have principles and policies, that we're analyzing student learning, and that we're communicating all of that information to our stakeholders. We also, as a district, set our instructional priorities, we pay for those priorities, we implement the priorities, and then we want to make sure that we're ensuring sustainability. And so this is just an overview of the budgeting best practice that has been established and the budgeting best practice that we truly are trying to ensure that Milton Public Schools is following this year and every year moving forward. And so with this information, it was really important for us for this year to talk about the Milton Public Schools budget philosophy and also what our budget priority was going to be. And so in order for us to do that, we established 5 district teaching and learning priorities, which then really spoke to what our budget priorities are going to be for the fiscal year 27 creation, which is the 26-27 school year. So I'm gonna hand it over to Superintendent Phelan so he can talk more about the creation of the teaching and learning priorities that were established by the administration team. And then we can also talk about the budget priorities.
Can I ask a question first? You said that the timeline is on the website. Will all of these slides be made available to us or?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Just to that point as well, last year there was a budget page of the website to codify and put in place a spot where folks could go get the material where needed. And we wanted to be proactive this year. So that budget page we're recreating for this fiscal year is being emailed out to all of our families in the weekly emails and the monthly email newsletters. We'll have a budget corner that we refer folks to. There'll be videos of the Wednesday finance subcommittee meetings. All the documents that we present will be on that website. Everything that we send out to families related to budget, and anything that we present either here or at finance for the school committee. So every budget related document not only will be stored on that page for easy access, but we're actually emailing it to our families. And anybody can join the Milton Public Schools newsletter that goes out monthly if you don't have to be have someone in school to do that. So I encourage everybody to log on, call central office, and we can put you on that as well in terms of communication. And I think that goes back to the slide with the budgeting best practice, the planning, the partnerships, and the communication. We met all summer when I was introduced to Milton, and Katie and I really talked about what were some of the things that we learned from the last few years, and what are some of the things we want to make sure that we shifted in practice in order to have a sustainable budget for Milton moving forward. And it absolutely intertwines with what is your instructional goals for the year. Our budget resources should follow the teaching and learning goals that we have for our children and our educators. With that said, we created a budget philosophy priority statement because it's really all about the teaching and learning in the classroom, and the budget and the resources follow the priorities of that behind the teachers and the students. So we got together with the leadership team, which is our principals and our curriculum directors in our central office cabinet. We spent a full day analyzing all of our data from the last few years, student achievement data. And we, as a larger group of about 31 professionals, came up with these 5 district learning priorities identified for the school year. They are provide all students with robust and intentional Tier 1 instruction. That's the teacher in the classroom, nobody else but that first teacher. That is where the intersection of learning happens. There's nothing more important in a school than the classroom. That's the main focus point. It has to be the first priority. The second thing that we really paid attention to is we want to use data to inform how we're teaching and learning in that classroom. We want to use data to inform how a building is organizing the teaching and learning in that classroom. And we want data to be used to inform how the district organizes all of its resources to follow it right to the classroom. So the next thing that we looked at through the data was the concept of wanting to increase rigor in our schools. We're looking at our data, and we're saying that we really need to make sure that we're engaging kids and students at a high level in different ways in order for that learning to stick and keep with them through not only that unit of study, but through the year and moving forward from year to year. So really coming up with high expectations and high support. And then we're looking at some of our students who aren't meeting with benchmark, and that's just not acceptable in this town. We need to have every student be challenged and engaged by that first Tier 1 instructor. We need to use data to find out who's learning and who's not and why. And then we need to actually take strategic steps to actually go after those students who might need something different in order to access learning. And so we're making that a priority as well. And then the last priority is all of that needs to be done in an environment that is friendly to learning, seeing people for who they are, who they come to school, how they come to school, what they may need, and making sure that they feel safe in school to learn. You can't learn if you don't feel safe. So all of those things are the priorities that we're focusing not only all of our budgeting on, we're focusing all of our professional development on it, and we're even evaluating our educators on their ability to provide those things in classrooms. And I'm in buildings every week with a checklist of those 5 things, looking for them in classrooms in all 6 of our schools to make sure we can support teachers in providing those tools in their teaching tool bags to support students. So they may seem simple, but they're actually grounding all of our work. Tomorrow we have a full day of professional development. It's a very expensive day. We have all students at home, all teachers in school, and we're actually having professional development offered for all of our elementary teachers at the middle school and all of our middle and high school teachers at the high school. Just focus on those 5 things, really digging in deep to what that means. The budget priorities that we set that are connected to our learning philosophy and priorities are, the first thing we need to do to keep learning going in Milton is have a long-term sustainable budget. We need a budget that can last and utilize the override funds and stretch them out, but also support teaching and learning. If that budget goes awry, learning doesn't happen. So we want to make sure that we have a sustainable budget. We want to also put money towards strengthening our Tier 1 instruction, actively addressing student learning gaps, and improve our climate culture. So that's what we're organizing our thinking about. So when we start to talk about what we're going to move forward with or what we're not going to move forward with, we have to apply that thinking to these priorities. So the full philosophy document is on the website. So when you go on, you can click that full document. It was presented at Finance Subcommittee on 2 occasions, and it was approved by the school committee last week. And to our timeline that we were talking about, the timeline was voted by the school committee, was also given to our budgeting coordination committee that's and it's also in line with what the town's budgeting calendar looks like. So we are all aligned in trying to make this work for the schools. So we are also really wanting to unpack, to go to the next slide, Katie, if you like. There's any questions about the philosophy before we go forward? We also just always want to remind folks how we can organize the work and get it done. We all have to work within our roles. And so we have a school committee that's very supportive. We have a warrant committee that's supportive, and a select board and a town administration that's supportive. But when it comes to our budget, the school committee has the role through Mass Education Reform Law to establish the goals and strategic direction, which they've already done, provide resources and budgeting to achieve those goals, which we're doing right now, set guidance and parameters through policy, which we've already had several policies approved this year, and then monitor the progress. We're actually reporting out on all of our MCAS data on Wednesday and letting the school committee know that we'll be back to show them what we're doing about it. The superintendent and our folks and my colleagues in central office, we need to implement those policies, manage daily operations, district staff and resources, implement approved financial plans, and oversee day-to-day fiscal matters. So right now, as Katie pointed out, not only are we supervising and working the budget for the year that we're in, and we're planning for next year's budget, we're always looking backwards to see what we can learn from the previous year. We always want to make sure we're comparing what we're doing to what we did in previous years, how we can learn from that, how we can budget appropriately, and really asking the questions of our educators and our principals. What have you been doing with the resources we gave you? How has it been working? And how do you know it's been working? What are some of the outcomes that you're looking for? And that cycle of learning and that cycle of support for our teachers and principals in that cycle of accountability, I think, is really important. So that accountability then comes to us to make sure that we're supporting the cycle of the financial planning that we're doing to make sure that they have what they need over time through the budget process around these areas. I'm going to let Katie take this next slide unless there's any questions. I give her all the hard math ones.
So the school department budget has hundreds of budget accounts. and they are grouped by salary accounts and also general expense accounts. So we review each account individually every single year. However, what drives the budget increases year over year is fairly consistent. And so some of the budget drivers we detail on this slide. The main budget driver, which 81% of our overall budget is made up of salary expenses, is due to our salary increases. And the salary increases in many instances, in the majority of cases with our employees, are driven by our collective bargaining agreements. So with the collective bargaining agreements in which the teachers fall under, our instructional assistants fall under, custodial and food service staff, it dictates the increases that are received year over year. And again, that's 81% of the expenses that make up the school department operating budget. There's also a number of mandated expenses that we have to account for every single year. And those include transportation, and you can see there's a reference to the Mass General Law. So in many of these instances, there's Mass General Law that is saying to us, as a school department within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we are mandated that we need to provide certain services to our students. So that includes transportation, some tuition costs for our Milton students that may attend schools that are out of district, and then other special education expenses. And you can see that is special education expenses are mandated by both Mass General Law and also federal law in many instances. There's also a statute called Chapter 70, which establishes a minimum net school spending. So schools are required to spend at a minimum that amount based off of a formula that is set by the state. So those are just some examples of mandated expenses that we need to take into account in the budgeting process every single year. We also need to make inflation adjustments and increases to current annual subscriptions and services. So we may have services that we pay for on a consistent basis year over year, but those services, much like any of the expenses that you may find at your home, typically increase year over year. Sometimes those increases may be higher than the 2 or 3% that has been typical in the past. And we also have to make inflation adjustments and increases. In recent fiscal years, inflation reached roughly 7 to 8%. And so when we're seeing that 7 to 8% increase on subscriptions year over year, it just means that in some instances, we can only afford to pay for a fraction of what we may have had in a previous year. So that's something that we have to take into consideration when we're building up the budget for the upcoming year. There are also, during the process of creating the budget, we have to consider fluctuations in revenue offsets. So a revenue offset is an outside revenue source that is used to reduce or offset the school operating budget. After considering these factors, the department can then look at investing in other priorities, but in many years, there really is little discretionary spending that the school department can invest their funding on. So in looking at, that was more of an overview of the expense side for the school department budget, but in looking at the revenue side, in overviewing some of the education funding accounts, funding sources to support the schools come from multiple sources. So there is local funding through the district operating budget. We also have a Milton Special Education Stabilization Fund that was established last year. There are a number of capital investments that capital funding is used to invest in our facilities and our technology on an annual basis. And then, as we had said, the revolving accounts are local, or the revenue offsets are local revolving accounts. So we have a number of accounts that fall under revolving accounts, and that includes facility rental accounts, athletic accounts, community schools accounts, and others. From a state level, we receive Chapter 70 funding, and that funding goes directly to the town as a part of the state budget allocation process. We also receive circuit breaker funding, which is a reimbursement program for past special education expenses. So we're reimbursed for a portion of special education expenses that fall above a certain threshold that's set by the state. And then there's also funding for the Medicaid program, and that's also a reimbursement process. And we receive funding from Medicaid on a quarterly basis. And then there's also federal funding, and federal funding has been a topic that has come up more recently just due to some of the volatility with the federal funding. The school department receives an IDEA grant from the federal government, which is a special education grant. We also received funding for an early childhood grant. And then there's a number of grants. They're titled the ESSA grants, but they're commonly referenced as the title grants. And it's Title 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Are you okay with questions during the presentation?
Sure.
I don't know how much or how little we want to get into details, but I'm curious about the circuit breaker. Can you say more about both how much it is and when it comes in? I know there's a timing question.
Sure. So circuit breaker is the special education funding program set by the state. It is a reimbursement of previous year's expenses. So we submit our information to the Department of Education in the summer. And then with that information, they create a threshold that over a certain, they set a limit. So over, say, $51,000 in expenses, any expenses in excess of that, the district is reimbursed at a set rate. So the current rate that was funded at the state level is 75% of expenses. So anything in excess, any expenses in excess for a specific student that's over that amount, we're reimbursed that 75%, that was what was built into the budget for this year. So it's reimbursed, we're being reimbursed this year for expenses that were incurred last year, and we're reimbursed on a quarterly basis.
Are you talking about that percentage for this coming budget process? Is the 75% in place?
So it's the 75% of the in excess.
Yeah, I understand that.
And then we use a portion of that to offset the special education costs for the current year, and that's built into the budget.
Right, what I'm saying is, will the 75% remain, is that just for this fiscal year or for next fiscal year?
So I believe it would be for next fiscal year, but that's set at the state level.
Okay.
Mhm.
To Elaine's point, do you expect any of this funding to be impacted based on what's going on in Washington and funding and the government and everything?
So some of the federal funding and the federal grants we'll have to keep an eye on because those could potentially, or even the timing of those could be impacted. Over the summer, there was a question on the title grants, if they were going to be allocated to the states, for the states to be able to use. So those that fall under the federal funding will definitely have to continue to monitor. I don't know if there will be advocacy at the state level if the federal funding declines, that the state will then have to try to backfill that because the amounts that we receive for the ESSA grants, for the title grants, they do certainly offset a portion of the budget, but some communities receive a larger portion. So be pretty impactful to communities if they lost that funding. So it's definitely something that we are tracking as we're moving through the budget process.
I would actually like also to come back to the circuit breaker account and just to add a little bit more depth to where we are locally. It's important to note that this is a reimbursement. It's not a grant. It's not a gift. It's reimbursing the cost from last year. You just get the money in the next fiscal year. In the state guidance that we get through my organization, MASS, and through Katie's organization, and also through the school committee organization, is the money that you get this year should be held in abeyance in a revolving account. So you could actually plan on knowing exactly how much money you'll have for that important expenditure in the following year. So you should always actively have 1 year's worth of circuit breaker funding. So hypothetically, that means that we should take every dollar that's given to us each quarter to represent that reimbursement from the state and keep it in a separate account. So when we're making the budget for FY27, we know that those bases are covered financially, and we're looking at all the other pieces, moving parts that we're doing in other parts of our budget. Some districts get behind on that and start to use those dollars and dwindle and draw down on those revolving accounts when times get hard. And that's what happened in Milton. So that revolving account right now is truly a budget priority. We need to be able to make sure that that account has a sustainable balance and that we work each year over the next 3 years to deposit money into that account in order to build it back up to where the state recommended balance should be. We couldn't do it in any 1 year because it's a significant amount of money. We get $3.1 million in circuit breaker reimbursement. So the state's saying that you should have that in this account right now. So you're planning next year with that in your pocket because you know you're going to have at least that many bills next year for special education. That's how our revolving accounts work generally. There's other revolving accounts that we would need support in our transportation revolving account, our athletics revolving account. This is where money comes in and money goes out, and we're working with different revenue structures in order to make these service deliveries work. And that revolving account acts as a I would say a shock absorber. So when we're going over some bumps, if something comes up that we need to fund, it can be relieved. The pressure can be relieved by using that revolving account, so it doesn't upset the general funding that's in the general budget for that's classroom issues. So we're working really hard on this behind the scenes budget priority that might not make as much sense to the general public when you're talking about, should I hire this teacher, or how many extra folks do we need for this, when we're going to be actually advocating for putting dollars into those revolving accounts, because our first priority is a fiscally sound and stable budget moving forward. So it makes good practice from a financial planning perspective to have every line in your budget funded in the recommended guideline ways. And so we're behind in that a little bit with our revolving accounts. So our fiscal role this year will be to pay attention to that and incrementally build it up so we can all look back and say FY28 and know that we have those revolving accounts and have healthy balances, and then begin to make sure that we're doing other things with our budget. But that will be a priority for this year. It's not a very sexy thing to say we want more of, but it's actually a financially sound thing to do for the long-term stability of the budget, which actually connects to the classroom.
Ask about how the circuit breaker is calculated. You gave the example of maybe 50,000 per student and 75% over that. Like, okay, last summer you submitted our numbers. At that point last summer, did you know what the 50,000 number would be? Or did you know what the 75 would be?
Yes,
Okay, so like right now, do you know what those numbers will be for this year?
yes. So the state sets the threshold for us, and then the circuit breaker funding information is released in October.
Oh, okay, okay, great.
But the one variability in that is that these funds go through a process at the end of the year that Kate described. So think about the X amount of students we have and the pieces that are moving in that, and the 75% reimbursement and the threshold, those are set. But what's not set is the expenses that every single town puts in. So that becomes a big formula where every town submits, they're giving every city and town general guidelines, 70% reimbursement goal,
Okay.
and a $50,000 threshold.
Okay.
But then all the expenses get pooled in, so they draw all the expenses from all 351 towns. And the expenses fluctuate year to year. Something might happen drastically in one town, or one town might have more expenses. They have to navigate that and resolve that, so that does impact your, we're pretty good at it now, and the state's pretty good at it now, so it's fairly predictable, but it's not certain the amount of money that you'll get every year.
Okay, so they're saying 50,000 and 75%, it might not be that. They're saying that's.
The amount of dollars may vary slightly based on how much action is going on in that statewide pool while they're trying to do it equitably through the formula that they've provided.
So the budget is set at the state level and their budget is passed in July. So in January, they say, okay, this is what we're gonna fund circuit breaker at in July. And it's similar to our process where they're doing it so far in advance.
Mhm.
And then to John's point, the towns may submit all of these expenses, and when they look at the budget that was appropriated and then the expenses that were submitted, they can in some years only submit or only reimburse up to 70%.
Okay, thank
So
you.
there's,
So it's
They make
expected,
adjustments.
but it's not for sure.
That's correct.
When do they
Thank you.
tell you what the percentage is? When do you know that?
so they tell you when the information is released in October. And then what had happened last year, so there's two pieces to it, there's tuition and transportation. The goal is to fund both at 75%. Last year, tuition was funded at 75%, but transportation, because the expenses statewide increased so significantly, it was only funded at 47%. So what happened though through the millionaire's tax is the governor proposed a supplemental budget. And so they increased the funding through a state supplemental so that we then received more money this past July, which was a portion of the funding that we used to make sure that we could close the books.
So you know what the percentage is for at least this year?
For this year, we do, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little confused. So what we learned in October was what we would get reimbursed for last year's expenses.
Correct.
And for this year's expenses, we got the guidelines, but we don't know what it
That's
would
correct.
really be.
Because you don't know if the governor is gonna put a supplemental budget in to take that transportation reimbursement from 49 back up to 75.
Correct.
You don't know that until July of next year. So there is variability there.
And that's why you wanna use the revolving fund, cause you basically wanna collect from last year and use that to spend for next year.
Right, so if we took all this, thank you, if we had we wanna make sure we show that discipline to create that account, so we always know that whenever we're going into the future fiscal year, we're carrying that number forward, so whatever they decide in July of next July will impact FY '28, but we'll have plenty of time to work it out and do something else in the budget to make sure that those expenses are covered, so that's exactly why
But it sounds like that revolving fund is pretty small right now.
it's $8,000,
I think it's fine.
$5,000.
So you're gonna try to have $1 million extra a year setting aside, so 3 years from now, you have the $3 million in the,
We'd like to work towards that goal as best we can without impacting the classroom. And people might say, well, you'll never get there. Well, you have to start somewhere. We have to be disciplined. We have to begin the process. And that's what our goal is this year, for sure.
And so anytime we see a decrease in a revenue offset, it has the same impact to the operating budget as an increase in expense. So that's why reviewing the revenue offsets and the fluctuation in our funding accounts is really important, because if we have any federal or state funding that is reduced, that could add pressure to the operating budget and how much we actually have to fund through our local funding.
Just ask, does the state, are there big fluctuations in year to year on what they reimburse percentage wise?
For circuit breaker,
Yeah, right.
they stay pretty consistent. They really work hard to stay at whatever threshold they set for reimbursement in the fall, they really try to stay with it. But you just don't know that until you get to that July point. So if that bigger bucket gets impacted by all the communities putting in their expenses and it goes over that amount that they have originally budgeted, they have to decide either to go with a lesser percentage of reimbursement, which Katie just described in transportation, went from 75 down to 49. And then when our local representatives start to say, hey, we were all budgeting this with a 75% expectation, most of the time they go back and give you a supplemental budget that impacts the state to get everybody whole, but there's just no guarantee of that, which always speaks to having 1 year in arrears in your hand going into the next budget year.
But they've never ended up at a big jump though, right?
They've ended up lower than 75 before, in the last 10 years on multiple occasions.
And when they reimburse, is that in June or what, is it like monthly or it's
It's
quarterly?
quarterly.
Okay.
So we did that quarterly this year.
Okay, so you're taking the quarter and trying to put it that in that fund or a percentage of that in the fund, that's what you're doing. Okay.
Can you ever see a circumstance where we use that circuit breaker account again, like in the future?
Would we use it again?
Yeah, would you use it, you dip into it? I mean, you said that we're at $8,000 now because we weren't fiscally responsible about that in the past. I mean, would there ever be a circumstance where we'd have to do that again?
So the rationale of having one year's worth, that 3 million, is because there's a lot of variability in what the expenses are that happen throughout the year. So right now, where we actually, Katie and I meet every 2 weeks with the special student services director, and we go over every single bill. Transportation, out of student district tuitions and contracted service. Fluctuations, what happened, what's going on. So can I see that changing in and out of a year? I can. Do I see the potential need to access circuit breaker money to make up the difference in any 1 year? I do, that's why it's there. Do I ever want to get in a situation where I have to go into it so deep that I actually damage the future year? That's what we're trying not to do, right? So the bigger balance we can carry that's within the state guideline gives that lever that we can use to expend some of that dollars in the current fiscal year, but have the majority of it follow us into the future fiscal year. But the reason why the state has that kind of system is because historically, every school department in the state has different needs for children that come forward each year that need to be addressed. And that gives us the lever to be able to do so in a way that doesn't impact the general school budget. So that's why it's so important to build it back up to its guidance level.
So I think it was 2 years ago that we had the unexpected increase in out-of-district tuition. So that would tell me that last year, continuing into this year, we will have extra big, our circuit breaker receipts from the state will be higher. Is that right? Is that what we're seeing?
So we know the amount of money that we're getting that'll be deposited quarterly by the end of the year. And that would be roughly
3.5 million.
Yeah. So it went up by about $300,000.
Okay, thank you.
So you'll be getting 3.5 for this year from last year's,
Correct.
and how much of that do you think you'll be able to save in the fund?
It's early, it's November 1. We actually had the meeting at 1:30 this afternoon. We'd like to think that we can carry maybe $800,000 over for next year if we're very, very lucky, but I'd hate to give a number out and have people sit on it. There's a lot that can happen between now and June. And if we do that in the next year, then we'll have 1.6, and if we do that in the next year, then we'll have 2.4.
So it's about
And then
4
we'll-
years to get it back?
Yeah, that's why we want to do it incrementally to approach it in a very realistic way.
Thank you.
So there are a number of questions that come up when talking about the school department budget. So in an attempt to answer some of those questions, we've created a budget frequently asked questions document. And so again, that can be found on the district's website. We've reviewed that previously at finance subcommittee meetings, and that's been shared with the full school committee. And just an example of some of the questions that are answered in that document is where can I obtain information on the school budget? Who sets the budget for the school department? What is state aid or Chapter 70? We talk about Chapter 70 a lot, especially when we talk about the revenue projections for the town. So that document gives more information on Chapter 70. What is a budget offset and what is a budget deficit? We had additional questions that were asked of us last year that we were provided that were more specific to the override. But there are some questions in that document that speak to what an override is, what an operational override is. So that document we have, again, on the district's webpage. And that's just for anyone if they wanted to, if they had a question that we may not potentially address tonight, that document is shared there. And we're more than happy to, if there's any questions that you think of that are not contained in the document that you think would be important for us to add, we're more than happy. That's a living and breathing document, so we're more than happy to add to that as the questions come up, especially during the budget creation process.
This is an aside, thank you for that, that's awesome.
So we want to make sure that you also, the budget page that we're proactively emailing out to families, and you can get on that listserv as well, also has our FY26 first quarter report that you may want to take a look at. And this is the kind of reading that Warrant Committee folks like. This has the narrative of the shifts in the budget and the percentages. This could be, our budget page could be the best streaming channel that you get. I know that YouTube TV just took ESPN off and Disney and everything, so this could be the next place that you want to go with your blanket. We also provide tables that show exactly where some of the money that we saved through not filling vacancies this year, where we put it and what we put it towards, which ironically is revolving accounts to support those accounts and have what we need. It also has great detail about what I think a lot of folks were talking about last year, which is the exact expenditures and the actuals and the projecteds that provide.
Great.
See, Jay's on, you're in. Forget about Netflix, you're on our website. So please take a look at this. This is gonna be what we will do every quarter, so people can see what's been encumbered, what's been expended, how much is left. Katie and I, especially Katie's been working really hard to encumber every single anticipated expense. So we have a placeholder for those dollars to be known and understood that will be expended on a certain service, so there are no surprises at the end of every year. And we'll also be probably closing down our general expense POs sometime in April, so people will understand that whatever is being requested at that point will go a different level of scrutiny, because we want to give ourselves that last quarter to make sure we know exactly what's going in and coming out, so we can make sure that we end fiscal 26 in an appropriate way. That doesn't mean that things will not be purchased at that point. It just means that we're gonna take that extra measure of going through every PO in a very thoughtful way to make sure that every line of our budget can be supported all the way through June. So the measures that we're taking throughout this year are very specific and conservative. The measures that we took over the summer to make sure that our projected budget aligned with our payroll and aligned with our FTE count. We took extraordinary measures to do that by hand. We went through every single employee, and that's when we decided to not fill some vacancies in order to have some dollars put aside to ensure that some of those revolving accounts that are down to balances that are worrisome to us, that we had some extra funds in order to put in places that we could access if we needed to during the fiscal 26 year. So we took some real clear action in the months leading up to school. We'll continue that vigilance during the school year. And we hope to balance the budget by the end of the year and provide a budget moving forward that's sustainable and still supports the classroom in a way that is afforded to us by the town, which, by the way, is, as I always say, I'm very thankful to everybody who voted for the override. It was an incredibly generous gift to the schools and to the town. And for the folks who didn't vote for it, we want to make sure you know that we will spend every single dollar in a very thoughtful way. And we'll do so in a way that supports the good stewardship of those dollars through the school budget moving forward.
Superintendent, that was great. I saw the reporting on budget to actuals, which fantastic when I think back to what my colleagues who are on the school committee review team on the Warrant Committee, that was one of the things that we're requesting. It's great to see that change. And I know you can't boil the ocean at once, and this is like incredible progress. But one of the problems that I had was sort of connecting the dots, and you talked a lot about data informing outcomes, data informing spending, et cetera, and there's a lot of pages in the budget, like basically 90 pages of expenditures.
571 lines.
And it's really difficult to connect that to need, for example. What is it? And I think one of the other things that one of my colleagues had commented on last year was it's impossible to figure out what the organizational capacity is. What sort of teaching capacity do you have in specific domains? So I'm sure you're doing it in some fashion. How are you connecting the dots? Because I can't, it's like really difficult for me to look at the budget and say, this is what we're spending, this is our need, how do we sort of marry the two, and what sort of processes or systems are you looking at to track the data to inform your outcomes and expenditures that you're talking about earlier?
So it's challenging to do so in a very direct way, in a dollar and cents way, because we're really talking about human beings and students and learning, and so it's the matches and it's kind of a round peg square hole kind of thing. But what we're doing this year is that we've already begun meeting individually with every principal to find out what their needs are, what they would like to realign in their budget to make sure that they're addressing needs of the students that they have. Once we finish those 6 meetings with each building principal, we also do that with the special ed director, because that individual is in charge of a lot of different moving parts that go over all 6 schools. And when we're asking the question, we're also starting next week, actually starting Wednesday of this week, what have you put in place to improve student learning? How do you know it's working? What have been some of the challenges? And what would you need to do differently to make those challenges turn into successes? So each one of those questions is really important, because I think things have been put in over time, like in every school district. They have to measure them. Did we get the appropriate outcomes for our children with those added positions over the last 2 or 3 years? Or do we want to use those differently and maybe shift what that position does? Take that resource of that 1.0 educator that may do a certain type of service delivery and change that into a math interventionist, because we see math scores that might need to be enhanced at the high school level or the middle school level. Or we might want to add literacy curriculum, which we just did with the support of the town by coming up with dollars to support the literacy package that we're actually purchasing this year. So we'd like to be able to point to the successes and the shifts in student growth that are positive to some of the things that we see teachers doing, and the funding that we're giving them for professional development, for materials and supplies, and also the type of intervention that we're looking for to make sure that students are being engaged and growing it. So we're really trying to connect the teaching and learning to the budget, which is why we have the philosophy that's connected to the learning goals, that's connected to how we're approaching our work with our principals for their learning goals, and actually what we're meeting with our 600 staff tomorrow on those 5 learning goals. So I don't know how to connect the budget directly to that in a way that people would understand. You know what I mean? I understand the question.
I understand that, really. What I'm
the-
thinking at is like, how are you measuring impact rather than, or outcomes rather than outputs? Like,
Yeah, so outputs is obviously different from outcomes, and part of the glue for these things that we're asking teachers to do in the 5 priorities and making their goals connect to these priorities is that I'm in schools every week. So I'm watching what people are doing and I'm asking questions, and we're all talking about, is this working in your classroom? I saw the interventionalists come in. What do they do? How long are they in there? What does that do for students? How are we measuring the results of that? You know, we have some really wonderful programs that appears to for some math enrichment and writing enrichment. So that's great. So how do we measure whether that's working or not? How do we want to think about it differently if it's not meeting with, the growth? The money needs to follow the good practices that we see with good student outcomes. And I'll give an example. Our science outcomes were very, very good last year. So when we see that, we ask, well, how did that happen? What worked? And we meet with the director of science, talk about their hiring practices, their meeting frequency, what they talked about for student data, how they use that data to inform instruction. And we're gonna have her meet with our other directors and talk about what was successful. So there's no direct, there's a lot of dotted lines that we're trying to connect, but it has to center around the classroom. It has to be connected to what's good for kids, what we think is working for students, the data that we're using to decide what to do and what not to do, and the outcomes. If there's no outcome after we're investing in certain things, then we need to revisit it. And that's the cycle of improvement that we'd like to engage and make sure that we're all doing. I think educators are used to doing that from a student outcome perspective. We have to overlay that district-wide budget conversation on top of that. You know, we just can't keep giving folks money to do things that we think might do well. We actually have to assess that and then have those hard conversations about what's working, what's not, and decide how to realign our current budget in a way that supports the things that are working.
And that goes back to sort of your question, what would I love to see on that budget page is some way, I mean, obviously anecdotally, measuring it anecdotally is important, it's an important part of that process. But how do we measure progress without creating a tool that people are gonna beat you down with a stick with? And so that we can see as a warrant committee or as a town or a taxpayer that some of the methods or intervention methods or investments in processes are having an impact.
We'd like to think one example of that, and usually these happen over a period of years, right? So it's hard because it's not a month-to-month thing, but what we'd like to say out loud, for example, is that we're investing in an early literacy program. It's best practice that DESE has explored about 5 or 6 programs. We're exploring all of those with the committee so that was a meeting that we had at the school committee 2 weeks ago. We'll come back in February to let the school committee know which platform we're going to use. We'll be putting money in our budget for next year, time for staff to meet and talk about it, get trained in it. And then we would like to see over the course of 2 years, those early literacy scores rise. They have to be that, it might be a 2-year window where we have to wait to see that connection. I know we live in a world where we get a lot of immediate gratification with, but these things do take time for the training and the setup, and then for the students to be engaged in it. So we'd like to see those kind of cycles in each one of our important content areas begin to show, what do you need, what can we do based on the data, and then have a cycle where we look back and say, all right, for the last 3 years, we've been supporting this. What does the data look like? Are we doing the right thing? Do we need to shift anything? So we would do that annually, but we would probably let the scores play out over the course of 3 years to get a couple of data points before we decide to stop doing something. But we make annual shifts in that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I like that back and forth, but I was also thinking the whole time, I mean, I know nothing about education or measuring educational outcomes or any of that. The first couple slides you gave with the goals, I thought those are great, but they don't mean a whole lot to me. I might ask the school committee chair, you've seen both sides of this. So, turning the budget into educational outcomes, that's, maybe primarily with the school administration, and then the school committee oversees them, and then there's the warrant committee. So if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, Ms. Serio, you've been on the warrant committee, you've been on the school committee. When it comes to turning a budget into educational outcomes, or just thinking about those things at all, what's the warrant committee's role? What's the school committee's role? Sort of an open-ended question.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Jay.
You didn't think I was gonna ask
I
you
didn't
that.
think you were gonna ask. No, I just go back to where we started with the goals. I think you have to know where you're going. Like, so those 5 priorities, that sets up sort of that roadmap. So if you're talking about tier 1 instruction, then that's where the effort and the resources go. And so that helps you prioritize the budget. So then it's our job to, we work with John and we work with Katie and we come to agreement on they share those priorities with us. And then there's agreement to them, and then it's sort of like that funnel, right? The priorities happen, then the budget falls out of it. And then I think where we come in is say, yes, that seems appropriate, that seems like the funding, and that's where I think the warrant committee comes in. I think you have to know the why, but at the end of the day, it's saying, okay, we understand it and we agree to it, and this seems like an appropriate expenditure, this seems the appropriate way to spend the money. So I'm not saying that you don't need to know it, but I think when you think about sort of the roles of each group, I think in order to understand and recommend funding a budget to a particular way, you as the warrant committee have to understand the why that went into the budget development. And I think that's where that comes into. So I think that's sort of what we've tried to do this year, which is set up those priorities and say, these are the priorities. And then what does that mean? Everything goes through that filter. So if it doesn't fit into those 5 priorities, then it's all likelihood not going to get funded because it doesn't drive to that goal. So I think if you use that as your roadmap and you use it as that roadmap as you're looking at the budget, and as we look at the budget, we do the same thing. And as John and Katie are going through and they're trying to figure out how to prioritize spending, they're using that. So I think if we're all using that as that same roadmap, then we're all looking at it through that same lens and recognizing whether or not that the budget seems appropriate and recommended. Does that answer your question?
Can I ask one question just on other salaries, because salaries is so important. What are other general salaries? What is that if it's not professional? There's a line item in there.
Our support staff, so instructional assistants fall under other salaries. Our technology staff would fall under
Okay,
others.
okay.
So some of that support.
So that's a big line item for your salaries, okay.
Mhm.
Can I touch on something you and Amanda had said, which is, I think, important? And I don't want to suggest that we're as a warrant committee, should say what the goals are, because I think the school committee has done a fine job of establishing those goals. I think the bigger thing is, in order for future budgets to be able to say, hey, this is a reasonable ask or not a reasonable ask, is that we need to understand, is what we're funding having an impact? And so outcome by nature is fuzzy math. I can think of a lot of different things that might help us measure it, and some of it being facetious, some of it being like honest, like graduation rates, college graduation rates, surveying students on how do they feel prepared, were they prepared when they got to college, or how many kids are going into trade schools, and anecdotal success stories are just lots of different ways you can sort of track outputs and outcomes and sort of try and get to some middle ground. And I think one thing we can agree on is are the proposed sort of metrics on the outcomes piece something that help us understand, connect the dots between a proposed budget and whether that gives us the information that we need to support or pull away from a budget that's being proposed. So
If I can tell you what's going through my mind, and I don't have the answer. The question I asked wasn't a loaded question. I really don't know the answer. But I guess if we were to get the data, the specific data you said, that would tell me, did the schools do a good job in the previous decade? And that's an interesting thing to learn. I don't know if that tells me, then if they are coming to us and asking for, an extra 1% over what we expected them to ask for,
it's different. And I think since we don't have historical information today, if we start tracking some of those outputs and outcomes and establish that as our baseline, it informs us going forward. It gives us something measurable to say that, hey, these are having impacts or not. And that's not necessarily to say that it's going to give us an answer. It may give us an answer because there may be economic factors or COVID or something going on that impacts it. But better than just guessing and saying this is having a material impact on educational outcomes or success stories.
I mean, they've been tracking standardized testing for years, though. I mean, that's a pretty big one, right? MCAS.
We have an MCAS presentation on Wednesday. We look back several years to make sure that are we growing, where are we growing, where are our scores flat? We have other data points like SAT, PSAT scores, graduation rates. We keep track of where students go to school as a one dipstick of what that means to folks. I feel like our scores are good but can get better. I feel like we need to, as you have described, really start to try to connect what we're doing to a strategy that's based on the data, that has certain outcomes that we're looking for, and go back and ask those hard questions. Did this work? Did we get the outcomes that we wanted? Do we need to make any shifts? And I look at everything through the lens of a classroom teacher, a building principal, and then the district. So, we're asking our teachers to make all of these important teaching moves, like, when they're working with students and they're not sure if they got it or not. I was in a grade science class last Wednesday at the Pierce, or a week ago Wednesday, and the teacher literally had the definition of mastery on the board. And at the end of the lesson, she asked every student through a Google Doc, I don't know how these things work, I don't do that stuff, but, and every student self-assessed. This is what I understood, this is how I understood it, this is what I need more help on. And then she gathers that data in one document through a Google Doc, and she can see where her class is. Geez, this concept really resonated. The majority of the kids are getting that data, they're getting the information, but I have a few who didn't, or this concept dropped, no one picked up on it. I need to reinforce that and revisit it tomorrow. So that's how they use data in the classroom. In the building, we're looking at that aggregate data. Where am I putting my resources? How many math interventionists versus reading specialists? How is that impacting the data for that? And as a district, we're listening to the teachers and the principals and asking them, what do you think is making that difference? And then connecting it to the aggregate, which is usually the MCAS scores, is that bigger picture trend that we're looking for, that kind of point to follow along. And the MCAS has always been, for me, not for the child, but more for the district to pay attention to what you're teaching well and engaging students in well, or what the adults aren't doing well, not the child. The child is learning whatever you're putting in front of them. So we want to make sure that we're aligning all those data points so we can meet with success. And in other parts of this is that, I think Katie said this earlier, so much of our budget is already expended. There's very little discretionary budgeting funds in a $72 million budget. And that sounds kind of crazy, but 81% is salary. Then you have bills like utilities. Then you have mandated costs that you have to pay. So after you get through paying salaries, which are mandated through contractual obligations, and mandated bills and utilities, all of a sudden you're really, where's that band of money that we're being used with discretion? We're also dedicating ourselves this year to say, well, within that 81% of dollars that represent FTEs, do we want to change what kind of FTEs we have? Maybe not add any, but actually shift. Maybe we need more of this and not as much of that. So we're trying to be thoughtful around how we realign the resources that we have, and whether or not we need to ask for more, or we just can realign and get that done. But we do need to connect everything we do to some way of showing measurement that backs up why we're asking for the money.
To that point, though, I think what I'm hearing you say blends a bit into what I think of as the school committee responsibility of, like, again, we are responsible for setting, like, what are the goals we want to see as a district? John, Katie, their team's responsible for carrying out those goals. We are responsible for looking at the measures you're talking about, like what, and being clear with John and Katie and the team on what measures we want to see. Like, we are interested in graduation requirement, MCAS requirements, student attendance, right? Culture surveys, diversity of staffing, teacher hires, like there are all kinds of metrics, the point you made, that we can look at, and that is, I think, our job of how we are evaluating the superintendent and the department as a whole. And then that's, if we're doing our job, then the town is evaluating us as elected officials on kind of a 3-year cycle to say, we approve of the direction of the school committee and the department as a whole, and so we are going to continue carrying these people forward or not, or we want a different vision, whatever that's like the town structure. In my opinion, the role of the warrant committee as the finance department here in supporting that is the budget we're putting together aligned with the town budget as a whole? Does it fits within the town kind of long-term financial projections? Is it a sustainable budget, to John's point? Like, are we doing the things necessary to ensure that this is not going to be a roller coaster budget? That we have some expectation over time that we can continue these programs and these expectations for town residents to have a certain experience within the Milton Public Schools. And, you know, as a committee, is the school committee on top of kind of evaluating doing our job, or there are some concerns in that standpoint that the warrant committee would like to flag for us to think that, hey, you might have a gap here or there, you should look at this. But the actual like performance indicator program evaluation standpoint, I think lives squarely, based on Master Law, squarely within the school committee role, and not kind of within the warrant committee side. It's my
May I ask a question? By the way, are you done with the presentation?
Oh, you are.
So next step.
That's next.
As we continue to go.
I have a bunch of questions, but like maybe to what Andrew was asking. So like the budget's in for 26, right? That's baked in. And like just for example, like I would ask, like going back, like special education, professional salaries are up, budgeted to be up 7.2%. And special ed salaries other is projected to be up 14%. Like, how do you quantify for that for us? Like, how do you say, is special ed students up? Like, why is that jump like that?
I would assume that the number of students who are on IEPs or get services would be increasing in alignment with that increase in service delivery. And I also would say that maybe within their IEPs, the need for more services within that IEP, so it might not be more students, but it could be more services needed to be delivered for that student that would require more services from special education professionals.
So, but is it, I mean, like,
I don't have the data, I
that'd
don't
be a
have the
good-
data in
that's-
front of me, but I would assume yes.
And I think if I can say, if you have the opportunity, I can find the date for it. Danielle Wetmore came and presented to the school committee, I think at the end of last year? And she went through, because one of the questions really is about, people do wonder, because it's one of probably the most, it has the most sort of ups and downs within the budget, the special education does. And I think it was really helpful the way that she sort of described the budget and the reasons for that, given sort of the variability, you know, students being referred at different times of year, different level of need for different students. Students go out of district at different times of year. If you have a student who is medically complex, they might need a higher level of service than some, and so that impacts the budget. And so, as Katie had mentioned before, there are those different mandated services that we want to, and we are required to, but we want to make sure that we're providing the services that our students need, and that in and of itself, there's a variability within that line. So that's one of the probably, you know, that's why, you know, John was saying that he and Katie meet with the Director of Student Services, you know, every 2 weeks. That's where you can sit down and say, okay, who's been evaluated? Do we have new students coming into the district or into the special ed program that have needs? And that's where that variability will come, and it's probably the least predictable thing, just because they're people.
So every special ed student has a different level of need.
Yes.
And I don't know how you quantify that, how you say this is a.
By the level, they have an
Testing, testing,
IEP,
yeah,
and
they
it's
do
you have an IEP and a student has something on it that says the services that they require. And as every person is different, every student's level of need and support is different, and so that's what quantifies it. So that there is a grid that basically says, this is the service that this particular student gets, and here are the people who are providing that service. And so then that informs the budget.
Literally the IEP could say something to the effect of 3 half hours of specific reading instruction per week. So then you add up how many students have that 3 half hours per week, and then you can quantify how many teachers you need to deliver that service. And then to Amanda's point, those meetings happen throughout the year, so those services could switch throughout the year. They could be added on to, they could be subtracted from. So we need to be prepared to fluctuate with that over the course of a year. And I would gladly, I think that because this subject to me is very student sensitive, would gladly meet with anybody from the warrant committee to kind of go over a special education 101 with folks through a financial lens to let folks know kind of the details of the moving parts of this that sometimes are hard to talk about, because I think sometimes families feel like, geez, every time we talk about budget, it's always a special education conversation. It is to the point that it's a fluctuating expense that goes in and out that's based on the children that we work with and their needs, which we are obligated by law and glad to do and want to do. But from a financial lens, the questions get awkward. So if anybody would love to sit down and talk about that process, how it starts from beginning to end, and how do we quantify it, and how does that look from a budgeting perspective, I would gladly take time with folks to do that at any point in the end.
I'd be curious, because I think
Yeah,
sometimes
glad
it's
to.
like, you know, you say, why are you going up so much? I'd be curious to see it, so
Sure.
maybe I'll take you up on it.
Gladly.
I'll take you up on it. It's interesting. Can I ask, so I see this sheet, and you have like the expenses for the first quarter on here. Are you on target, do you know, for the year on budget? Great. Do you do budgets on a month-by-month basis? Because, you know, like, do you budget like July 25, August 25, September 25? No,
Annual basis.
you do an annual basis, and then you look at what you spent. But it varies, so that must be hard to really figure out and get a handle on.
And then we try to, so the encumbrance portion, which that's a column in the report, that is where we're earmarking what we're projecting that we're going to spend for the remainder of the year. So that is almost like the forecast of what we are projecting the outstanding expense to be. And so that's why we're trying to make sure for all of the department heads that have a piece of the budget that they oversee, that they are alerting us of what that encumbrance is or what that outstanding expense is going to be for the remainder of the year, and then we're memorializing that by putting it in the accounting
So
system.
the principals, which is the people that are in charge, right?
Yes,
That's great. They're figuring, they do figure out what it's gonna be for the rest of the year. They have some calculation spreadsheet. So they are kind of doing it on a month-by-month basis.
So I would say it differently. I would say that every principal gets an allotted amount of money for text materials and supplies as one example. And we go over all those lines with them. They know what they need to buy, and how do they know what they need to buy and how much? We all look back 3 years at our actuals and our projected budget and look to see where they were consistent. So if I used X amount of paper every year as a principal, I could look back 3 years and say, geez, I always buy X amount of pallets, cost X amount of dollars. So that's how they don't do it by month, they do it by service delivery and the material that they buy. And sadly, the material budget is a very small portion of it. It's really the only thing they get really discretion over, is some of the smaller amounts of money that they spend on paper, materials, supplies. We're trying to put the budgeting for things like professional development at the centralized level. So when we see the need that the district wants to do something that we think is important across the whole district, that we have the lever to use to fund that. So we have experienced principals, which is great. They do know what those students need. And you can kind of see some of the budgeting for non-salary things. They're about 8% spent or 10% spent. We're 1 month of 10 months of the school year. You can see some of those lines have more things encumbered because we're actually working really hard to identify every expense we have and encumber it and hold a spot for it, so we know that we won't have surprises at the end of the year for something that we didn't know was gonna be purchased. And that's why we'll kind of maybe move up the time where we pull back and have all the expenditures done a little differently, so we can actually make sure that we're watching everything a little bit closer.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of experience, but I would say, I bet if you did have everybody do a month-by-month budget, it would be a lot easier to figure out where you are in tracking it. It would be much simpler, and I bet a lot of towns do it.
when I think of a month-to-month budget for a school department, there's fluctuations throughout the year
Yeah.
of the utilization. And so schools spend a lot of money at the beginning of the year to prepare, so they're purchasing all of the crayons and construction paper and everything that they need. So a lot of that happens over the summer, so we can make sure that the teachers have what they need. And then they'll draw from that And so there tends to be a lull for a couple of months, and then it will pick up again. And then the months of April, May, and June, when we're trying to close the books, and then all of the events are happening, and there's a lot that happens in schools during that time, graduation, concerts, just all of that. And so it's almost hard to do it on a monthly basis, just because that's why it's more of knowing the cycle and saying, okay, you said you needed, last year you used 4 pallets of paper, this year you said you needed 4. I'm not gonna tell you when you're going to order it, but we know that you're gonna use 4 pallets of paper this year, and we're gonna make sure that the expense is memorialized.
I mean, I've never worked in a place that had a budget cycle. It was always annual.
Yeah.
We're monthly budget cycle, I mean, you track budgets monthly though.
Oh,
That's
sure.
what Brian's talking about.
Yeah, I
We
think
do our
most
big-
companies do
Yeah.
it.
But to the
Okay.
point of
So-
cyclicality, I mean, I work in small business and commercial, and there's a lot of businesses that are cyclical, so it kind of like, you budget it when you know, like, this cycle's gonna come
Oh, I
up,
see.
and then you kind of lull it down depending on what, like, the business is. That's kind of, sounds like what you guys are trying to do.
I'm
We
looking at-
our budget is already established for the year, and so the ebbs and flows we really have to manage throughout the year. From a budgeting perspective, so the schools and the principals, they're really utilizing the resources. But from a budgeting perspective, we're running those reports. Sometimes when I get to January, February, March, those reports, the accounting system reports, we're running them on a daily basis. So we're constantly running what's our balance, what's our projection, are we going to be able to close? Are we managing, do you want another pallet of paper? No, there's no money, we need to potentially wait or do something else, right, to try to manage the expenses. So it is kind of an ongoing iterative process that we're working.
I don't wanna be the dead horse, but if you had a monthly budget and you could see what they did, like 5 months budget versus 5 months actual, each principal could just see it on their own and they would have an idea of what's going on.
And so just from
Might
this.
save you time.
Do they not have their own budgets that they manage to? or
They do have their own budgets, but I think just from a school's perspective, the principals are so busy running buildings. And so we're trying to help support them with the budget. In many instances, some of them didn't have visibility into their budgets before this year. And so this is a somewhat new process for them that they're trying to learn at the same time that they're managing all of the concentration is teaching and learning in the kids. And so I'm trying to help them with the budgeting and supporting all of that, but the focus is always going to be the students. They need to be in classrooms, they need to be calling families. So it's just trying to measure what we can do from a business perspective and supporting the principals, and then making sure that we have realistic expectations that their primary focus is on teaching and learning and students and staff.
Thank you.
So I'm thinking about like what the warrant committee is gonna be doing this year and how we're gonna be working with the schools this year. I mean, at the very fundamental level, the biggest question is what the school's budget request gonna be for this coming year, and why is it different than the previous year? Or what sort of justification do we need to understand that budget request? And I'm just trying to think through, and this could be a discussion of everyone at the table, how do we, what information do we need? What information should we be getting to understand the budget requests that we're gonna be getting from you in the spring? And there are, by my count, sort of 5 groups that are interested. One is the whole warrant committee, and second is the warrant committee school subcommittee, which is, I don't know if you met the people sitting to your left, Elaine and Lorraine, and Julia's not here tonight.
She's online though.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
She's always listening. So that's 2 groups, and then there's analogous, there's the full school committee and the school budget subcommittee, and then the 5th group is the administration. So what, I'm sort of asking everyone at the table, I'm asking the warrant committee members, I'm asking the school members, you're gonna be presenting your budget to us, and you're gonna be saying, this is why it's an appropriate budget. What's the way of communicating information to us? What information do we need? Some of the information will be going through our school subcommittee. I don't know if you paid attention. Were you forced to be at the town meeting? I think John was. Good, that's the right answer, good. But the way we prepared for this fall town meeting is we had one or two experts for every article, and they came back and reported to the bigger group. You know, hopefully, for the most part, our school subcommittee can come back and report to us and tell us what's going on. Might still have other questions. I'll stop rambling, so sort of opening up to anyone on any side of the table.
So I think it might be helpful if we pulled up, because there are, the timeline that we
timeline, yeah,
have. So I do think, you know, yeah, it's on the time, so I think there are things.
So I think just to.
It's very tiny.
At the end
To
there.
address this just generally is that we are making every effort to be proactive and transparent with the work that we do in the budget, not only for the year that we're in, but for next year, more importantly, to your point, Jay. We've been meeting weekly on Wednesdays. We record those meetings, so we invite if the subcommittee folks can't make it to the meeting or they can't watch it live and be a part of the meeting, then they can always click on it and take a look. All the documents are posted there. So in any time that you all want to meet to talk about any questions, we can, while we're drafting and while we're coming up with the budget that we want to put forward to the school committee based on what we feel the students' needs are and then the principal's needs are, there's going to be some moving parts. And there's also there needs to be an opportunity for the public to weigh in on what we work for the community. So while we're building it, we gladly welcome the feedback and the questions as we go along. But essentially, we'll come up with a budget that is at a revenue spot that fits what the town's projections are. We want to be able to show folks what the ins and outs that maybe we're realigning some of our positions in order to address certain needs that are connected to some priorities that we have. There might be some debate about those. We might maybe need 2 more of these, and we might need to reduce one of something else. And so we want to do that very openly and let people have some opinion on that and make sure they're aware. But as we're building it through now to say January, we then really want to get in front of folks and start to say, this is our draft one. This is not just rolling everybody over and calling it a day. We're actually going to, try to be thoughtful about any realignment within our budget that we think we want to make in order to address certain needs that our students have from a lot of different ways. And also try to address, and the reason why I spend more time on revolving accounts is to say that behind the scenes, we're really also trying to build fiscal sustainability into the budget that really isn't a popular thing to do. Because it's a long-range plan, right? It's what preparing the next 2 or 3 years of budgeting. If we can just stay conservative a little bit and do that, then we can breathe easier in the next couple of school years after that's established. So that's not a really idea that might have someone to get more recess, or it might not be another math specialist. It might need to be those priorities are going to have to be part of the picture. So we're really going to be in a really healthy tension around fiscally appropriately budgeting for sustainability, because we're not getting an override anytime soon, so we need to be responsible because we just got a very large one, but also delivering things to students and staff that they need in order to make sure that those outcomes that we are trying to receive, we get. So we'll be working on that between now and December as the timeline outlines. We'll be meeting with warrant committee members at some point in January, February to say, this is our first draft of that. We are always meeting with Nick and Amy from the town side to get any understanding of what's changing from the revenue perspective. We're making some general assumptions, that we're gonna get, at least the same amount of chapter 70, that we're gonna get this much money. So we're embedding this process in assumptions that everybody makes every year in school districts, and then trying to demonstrate what we're doing and why we're doing it and why we need the amount of money that we need. That hopefully is within the parameters of what we're able to spend on behalf of whatever the town's revenue is.
Any other?
Just totally echo John's point, and hopefully the sustainability piece is a popular opinion, at least within the warrant committee, right, within the finance folks. But to the point of just the collaborative, I don't think we need to answer your question, I guess, tonight. I assume y'all will have these conversations kind of on an ongoing basis, and we look forward to getting that feedback from your experts. I assume that's also part of that process is y'all are funneling stuff to the experts, they're getting information, bringing it back, getting more questions, coming back and forth. And so we're really excited about that, and I saw how I thought your vision of that and the warrant committee's work of that went really well with the fall town meeting, and so I'm excited to see that play out in the overall process. And I assume that's not a question that's also unique to the schools, it's applicable to all town departments, like exactly what is the information you wanna see about DPW, schools, police, all the kind of different areas. So don't think we have all the information. I'd also suggest you could look at some of our budget presentations from last year as a baseline of what we've tried to share with the Warrant Committee before. I think we shared a lot. It was obviously a different budget process than we expect this year given the override, but that is a foundation kind of for, I think, how Katie and Amanda and I, at least, were all here, and how we were thinking about trying to impart information to the Warrant Committee. And then certainly, would love additional input, just make sure that whatever time we're putting in front of y'all or taking up in front of y'all is the best possible time, right? We're being efficient with it, and we're getting to the point and doing the things y'all are expecting of us.
I know you're wrapping up, you sound wrapping up.
I'm not necessarily wrapping up.
Oh, okay, I just had some more questions, can I just bounce around?
Well, okay, I guess I will say, back to that question that I just asked that John and Mark responded to. Did you have any other thoughts? Did anyone on the Warrant Committee have other thoughts about, the information flow from one to the other?
No, I think the two things. One is the goal of this meeting was really to make sure that all of the Warrant Committee was entering it with that same level of understanding, recognizing that there are gonna be 2 or 3 people who will become sort of those subject matter experts. And then I think I would just say any questions where we're getting more specific about the budget or past budgets or budgets moving forward, we would kind of use that within those planning meetings moving forward, just really treating this as sort of like a general overview of the process and the roles, responsibility and timeline. But I think from there, like we were saying, our meetings are open, anybody is welcome to come, and I just think as you and the two of you and Julia get more involved, if there are times where, if there's information that you want, I think one thing that's been helpful in the past is if there are questions sort of getting getting a set of questions all at once, making sure that there's sort of a streamlined process for having that come through. I would say it goes through Mark being the chair of the finance subcommittee, and being able to be efficient with that. So sort of it isn't like questions here and there, that there's sort of a consensus and agreement from the committee on what they're asking. And so that then we can go back and get it to the right people. So I think just making sure that the process is streamlined is really helpful. But yeah, and I think just really, and then I'm sure that the 3 of you will have questions around how do you want to meet? Are there meetings you want to come to? Is there time that, we want to make sure that you feel free to be able to ask questions within them, so.
I can distill it down to 2 really basic questions, which is historically we've been very good at being a lot of things we're always informed about what changed, like what are the deltas, and that's the easy piece. And the harder piece is what's the baseline and is that the appropriate baseline? And so not being experts about schools will leave outcomes and sort of a lot of things to the experts, being the school committee and the school administration. And the real piece is just helping us understand, how do we understand that what we have as the baseline for the budget is appropriate, and I love a lot of the things that I've heard from you tonight about looking at whether or not it, in terms of staffing, does it make sense? Our resources, given that salaries are 81% of the budget, I mean, that's the biggest place where you can have an impact. And so is that being allocated in the best financial and outcome-oriented way? Then as long as I understand that, then that's a budget that I can get behind, whether it's a bigger number or the same number.
Is that 81% like similar in other districts, like school districts? That's kind of standard.
Yeah, we're in the middle, yeah.
Oh, we are?
Yeah, so I just did a dangerous quick ChatGPT, but somewhere between 70 and 90% is
Really? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. 70 and 90%. Okay. That is a lot.
Brian, you had
questions.
Yeah, just a few. Is union contracts up this cycle, right? Do you know when is that?
We start negotiations tomorrow,
Oh, okay, so that'll tell you what the next salary, so you.
when it's completed.
When did that, when does that contract cover? The like,
Next 3 years.
So-
Usually it's 3 years.
right now, right this minute, we're on the old contract.
We have a one-year,
Oh,
we have a one-year
One year.
agreement that's covered for this year.
Through June
Extended
30th,
the old contract.
26th?
Yes.
Okay.
No, through
Which,
Oh,
August 31st.
Yeah.
Which school committee members are on the bargaining team? Anybody from finance? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Katie is.
And Leslie, okay, great.
Do you know what the population, I don't know if when you submit that to Desi, is that what the school population is this year versus last year? Has it increased or anything?
Just submitted
Are
enrollment.
do you have those numbers?
Our enrollment numbers for this year? Yeah, we do. They'll be on they're on the agenda for this Wednesday night.
Oh, okay, cool, great.
We're plus, from the aggregate standpoint, we're up a few students, and I think, Mark, you had said this, that I think this is maybe the largest student population that we've had in Milton for a very long time.
You're up a few students or not, you don't mean two, you mean like a lot?
No, meaning over time, the district's enrollment has gone up each year incrementally to the point where this is the largest student enrollment we've had in the last many, many years. I think it's over 4,000. We just submitted the data. Every October 1, the state takes that
See
data.
Mark's.
Okay. It's been kind of flat for like 6 or 7 years, the population.
Enrollment?
The enrollment, it's roughly around 4,000 students, but it hasn't gone down. It's been going up by a couple of students a year, it hasn't gone down. And every level looks a little different. And every entering kindergarten looks a little different, which is usually the big marker.
Yeah, 2019 was the highest, 44.25. I don't know if it's that much.
That was 2020, that was SY 20.
What?
2019, 2020. SY
Yeah,
20
yeah.
was the highest ever. This year will be,
20.
at least based on projections, was the second highest ever at
This will be this.
4381, something around
4381.
there. But again, that was earlier projections. We'll get the actual numbers tomorrow.
Okay.
October Sims hasn't been published by the state, but that also comes out.
The state does freeze data.
So it goes up
They take it on
by,
October 1, they hold
October
it.
John
one.
said, a little bit each year.
That's what they call it,
It's
the
not
October
going
1.
down.
That's funny.
And the higher ed, we call it.
Significantly above where we were.
Take a snapshot.
That's a snapshot, yeah.
Asking for a friend, the bus thing, people asked, I know this came up
Are
last year.
you asking for a friend, is that what you said?
Asking for a friend, yeah.
I know somebody who wanted to know.
What? Of all the people on, all the students on buses now, are they able to get on buses? Cause I know there was a big,
So
like
right-
116 or something.
So right now, we at the beginning of the year, we had a number of students, families on a wait list. We made some adjustments to routes and some adjustments to bus capacity. And we took over 50 students off the wait list and onto buses about 3 weeks ago. We promised the families that we would do a second assessment of ridership. We've done that over the last 2 weeks, and we're getting ready to inform probably about 25 more families that they'll be able to come off the wait
Oh,
list.
that's great.
And that will result in everybody who applied for a bus on time would actually be on a bus this year. That does not account for those families who did not apply for the bus on time, and they would remain on a wait list.
How many is that?
It's a good amount, it's a good 40 folks. And then what we're analyzing for next year is whether this means that we need an extra bus. Do we need to re-examine our routes? Do we need to start the routes farthest away and then to come in from a strategy to make sure that us families that live the farthest away from school get buses first? We will do all three of those things as we prepare for next year. So we have remedied the situation considerably without adding resources or financial burden to the district. But that's something that we want to make sure we can do in a very more thoughtful way next year.
Is it worth, I guess it's like $533 or something like that a day to run a bus or something like that?
It's $100,000 a year.
$100,000 a year. And is it worth just increasing everyone's like
Did we?
All of them, a little
So-
bit,
So
so you can pay for
yeah,
all
part of the
of it.
analysis will be how much of this do we want to come from our operating budget, which you guys can, have, and how much of this do we want to increase fees to make that formula work. So that's the offset, that's the revenue offset that we could use for that. So that will be an analysis that we do if we feel we
Make it easy for them.
make it, yeah.
And I
But-
think a similar, if I can just, there was a meeting, again, we can get you the date that we went through, and I know that Katie had done the analysis of what would be the required increase per family to afford an additional bus, wasn't that? And it was like $1,000. There's like the cost of the bus, you can't raise a family fee enough to cover another
Correct.
bus.
Oh, the whole thing.
The
Yeah,
whole
we-
thing.
it's just not
It's not feasible to
feasible,
have
yeah.
a fee cover the cost of a bus. And so there is a portion that that will always come out of the fund, but you couldn't, it's just not it's not financially, no family could afford, they should just hire a private driver. That's at that point, right, an Uber account, it's just not.
$100,000.
This is another example of why revolving accounts are important and
Right.
why we do balance fees that are reasonable
Right.
to offer the service that can be funded in part mostly by the operating budget and in part by that fee. Same concept goes for athletics. So we charge athletic fees to play a sport. Some of that money that we pay for athletics with, it comes out of the budget. Some of it comes out of the fees the students pay. And some of it actually comes from the gate receipts that you pay to go to a game, unfortunately. And those three revenue streams make up our ability to have an athletic department. So it's always a balance between that. But it speaks to making sure your revolving accounts have sufficient balances so you can actually use them in a way that interact thoughtfully with the services that you want to deliver.
Maybe in this case, it might be something to look at because the incremental cost increase would be $100,000. And there's like 500 kids, I think, that take a bus, but it would be probably 600 with all the additional kids that you had. So then it would be more like in the 100 and math. $80 rate.
It's difficult because it's a step, right? And it makes sense if the incremental bus is
Incremental
full.
bus.
Is
Well, increase the fees on everybody, whereas maybe they were saying,
And I think-
families pay for a
I think that
bus.
that's
Yeah.
something
That's
as
what
we're
I-
looking, I think as we're looking, I think again, it goes back to what are the priorities? And we heard from a number of people that solving the transportation problem is a priority, and we understand that and recognize that, and that goes into that climate and culture piece. And so as we are looking, we have a set amount of money. And so as we're looking at the budget next year, John and Katie, their job is to prioritize that. And then if a bus becomes a priority, then we need to figure out what moves, right? So, because we can't just add, so we have to, and so that would be part of that conversation, and part of that would be, is it an exploration of fees, is it an exploration of adding a bus? And you look at, again, like ridership and routes and all of those things that go into that equation to then figure out, the solution that makes the most sense that we can afford as a district. So I think all of those different scenarios are going into it and determining what the best solution is for the coming year.
I think this is an interesting discussion. It's been a very free-form discussion tonight without a sort of specific agenda. I think going forward, this may be a level of detail.
Yep.
I think that maybe the whole warrant committee isn't going into. I mean, we've talked about this
Just
over the past
thought.
few months.
I think,
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have a specific agenda for tonight to say accomplish this and this, and so that's why I'm sort
it's a
of.
But I
few
think-
opportunities to talk to the school.
Exactly,
So I
exactly.
wanna get all my
So that's why
questions in.
So we have public.
I wanna say I'm being a little loose tonight, but I think going forward, like, if 2 weeks from now, we're talking IT, we're talking library, we're talking Board of Health, I wanna be a little more focused on.
So I do think though that helps to say when we come back, if, again, we're looking at what the priorities are and then what the budget priorities are, and that will frame the discussion of what's being presented in front of you. So, in the back of your mind, as you're thinking about transportation or something else, recognizing that would fit into that framework, that whatever has come into the budget has gone through that funnel that we talked about. And
Yeah, I figured, but it's a hot button issue now for some people, so I figured I'd ask. Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks for looking into it. I just have one more subject, if that's okay. I know that they built the 3 classrooms over at Cunningham, which I don't know if those are completed, but I assume they are. And I assume it helped alleviate, but not fix the overcrowding issue, right?
So we added significant square footage with the renovation of the library into classrooms and office space. In office space being not just where adults have their desk, but where they do small group instruction. So we gained several student-facing spaces that were dearly and sorely needed. The work was done between the end of school and the start of school. Nick Milano with his team, and Tom McCarthy from facilities, did a wonderful job of organizing it. We went to meetings, construction meetings. The team did a great job. So the added square footage was incredibly useful, and it continues to be super useful. Over the course of the summer of '26, they'll do into the attic, they'll build the library out. So right now, our students are getting the library on a cot at the Cunningham Collycott until that's fully done. The budget came in, the construction project, I believe, came in under budget. And the facilities committee toured the space a few weeks ago, and it's really beautiful space. It's very well utilized, and it even so we're very thankful. The square footage is super helpful. There's still some crowding at the Cunningham Collycott, believe it or not, that we would like to alleviate for sure. But it was a very good start, and very thankful to the town to fund it through the capital process.
Did you say library on a cart? Is there no physical library now?
No.
And for the 1 year,
Sure, no.
the library will be put in the attic when it's done next year.
That's what they told
No,
us.
no, I'm just like
Yeah.
envisioning Shawshank, I mean,
A little nicer than that.
So, so I talked to the school building committee, and one of the questions I had on it, two things, is that NESDEC is projecting a decrease over in the population, small, like 3% student population over the next 10 years, I think.
I think again, this, we're sort of being loose here tonight,
Yeah.
but,
Well,
We're not-
I'm gonna be loose.
okay.
So they're projecting a decrease of like 3% in the next so many years, 10% of student population. And I know Liz was here last year and we talked to her and she said, well, we should look at other options. And when I looked at the school building projections, their student population projections were higher than what NESDEC is now presenting, like by a lot. Like if you looked at just the elementary school, it was overprojected. It was overprojected by 254 students for 2028 versus what they were projecting.
Yeah, I don't think that's
So-
Yeah, this-
the warrant committee's
They're
covering.
only allowed to do it via births. They can't account for people who move into town for Milton schools.
Yeah, so that's a question.
So they always hire.
So that's a question. So I was wondering if it's worth it. Two things. One, re-looking at those numbers and seeing if they're still valid. I think that's worth looking at. And the second thing is looking at maybe other options, if there's other school options out there.
I think that's what the school
Like-
building committee is doing.
Yeah, that's outside of the scope of this meeting and even that
Yeah.
meeting with
Well,
Sean.
they're under the school committee, aren't they?
No,
School building committee is under
by
the
itself?
town meeting.
Under the
It was
moderator.
established by town meeting.
Well, I figured they care about overcrowding, so.
Definitely care about overcrowding, right?
yeah, that's what the school, they're going through that whole process with the state, and, the state won't give us money unless we justify it to them, so they're going through that process as we speak figuratively. So, and it's not in my nature to shut down conversations, but I also don't wanna stick the thunder too far off topic.
I think it's on the agenda as well.
Oh, off agenda, yeah. Oh, we're not voting on things, but. We just stopping point? We are.
So I welcome anyone to contact me if you have questions about any of the things that we talked about tonight. I welcome partners from the warrant committee to work with you this year. I look forward to it. And however we can be helpful moving forward with information, so we can go through this process in a way that's helpful. I'm gladly to be partnering in that, so thank you.
All of this information is on the website.
Correct. Yeah, on the budget page, yeah.
Super nice website.
Yeah,
That is
Thank
really
you
great.
for the hard work
No
you guys
other
did on that.
departments have that.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
you know,
gorgeous.
I mean, it's the biggest budget, I was like looking for the IT one, it's
All these
nothing.
numbers.
Thank God. Stephanie O'Keefe is our person who manages that and is vigilant around making sure everything goes up on time. And she also does all the communication out to families, so It's not enough now just to have it on the website. We really wanna make sure we're pushing it into people's inboxes when we ever have a change or we have a document that's added, in order to make sure that we're getting to people, so they're fully informed.
Alright, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the meeting is, does anyone wanna vote for adjourn? Adjourn?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unanimous.
Everyone, go home.